Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, Jack Slack, the motivated BJ Penn of podcasting. And it's episode 23? Yeah, 23 of the Fights Gone By podcast. Before we jump into it, let's do some news. Not an awful lot interesting going on since the last podcast, because I think I released that on Thursday or Friday. Very late in the week. Apologies about that. Evangelista Cyborg Santos retired, which is probably a good thing because you will remember him most recently for getting his skull caved in by a flying knee from Michael Page. If you didn't know, about a month before that, he was KO'd by about 50 unanswered blows by someone else because Bellator is running a freak show over there. But it is always good to hear that a fighter has finally taken a loss to mean that their career is over, and is finally backing away from it. I mean, he was never a terrific fighter at his best. Always had gas tank issues. Was essentially the male cyborg. He just swung for the fences. But an important part of the sport's history nonetheless. Had a fight with Nick Diaz. Had that ridiculous war with Melvin Manhoef where they both gassed almost immediately and then swung from the waist all the way through. And then Manhoef knocks down Santos. The fight gets waved off, Manhoef collapses to his back, and Santos comes up on top of him with the weakest hammer fist you've ever seen because he's completely exhausted and just been knocked out. Hilarious stuff. But yeah, solid career for Santos, and glad to see that he's taken the caved-in skull as a sign to maybe not fight again. What else happened? Apparently TNA recorded 2 endings to a match with Bobby Lashley and Josh Barnett. Both what we term in the biz dusty finishes. If you didn't know, Dusty Rhodes, aside from being a lovable character and tremendously enjoyable wrestler, he was the world's worst booker. He would book every match to finish with a sort of a non-conclusive finish. So they'd brawl to the outside and get counted out, or someone would, outside interference, the one that everyone hates all the time, and a DQ. A dusty finish is essentially where one guy wins, but then it turns out he hasn't. So apparently, Lashley gets pinned, gets his shoulder up, and then they have to call in more referees, and then Barnett gets pinned and gets his shoulder up. But good for them, making Josh Barnett look good. He's a good pro wrestler, and he's passionate about the business, and can never hurt to have a legit tough guy on staff. Vince McMahon still has a massive boner for anyone who can actually fight. Oh, and Dana White appeared on The Herd with Colin Cowherd. Most notable probably for his hot take. He's one of those guys like Skip Bayless, where he's realised if you say things that are wrong or outrageous, people will watch you out of anger. Colin Cowherd very famously said that September 2016, Mayweather versus McGregor, it's set. Get your tickets. And obviously that didn't happen. But, Dana White went on and said he'd offer Floyd $25 million, blah, 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 blah. It's not happening. If it does, I'll say, oh, wow, how interesting it's happening. Fancy that. That looked almost impossible. But until then, it's just the most unlikely thing in the world, and we should all get over it. Right, on to the fights. So we'll start with the really sad one. To start with, BJ Penn versus Yair Rodriguez. This has worked out weirdly because I assumed that everyone, when Rodriguez beat the shit out of Penn, everyone would go, well, Penn hasn't won since 2010. But this has actually worked. People are now like, oh my god, Yair Rodriguez, he's so hot. I like Yair Rodriguez a lot, but kicking BJ Penn 3 years out of retirement, almost 10 years away from his last win, not a huge deal. I mean, BJ Penn trained his entire career almost as if kicks didn't exist. So, the fact that Yair Rodriguez landed every kick he threw, not that impressive, to be honest. More interesting was the fact that when Yair did actually step in and punch, BJ still slipped it and landed a couple of counters amid getting his ass kicked for however long. But, technique or no technique, and ability or no ability, BJ Penn came in looking like a little old man. You were looking at Yair Rodriguez, and that was a young, muscular, athletic dude at the height of his powers, and BJ Penn looked like a little old dude. So you got your 540 round kick, and you got your liver kicks, and you got your jumping switch kick, all very interesting. And then, and you got a bicycle front kick to the face, the old Nidan Gary. Second round starts, Yair slides back, throws the front snap kick, hits the chin. It slides off, and he throws a punch and knocks Penn down. Swarms on him with hammer fists, and to be fair to Penn, he was still recovering his guard. He was still doing the BJ Penn thing, but he was getting hit in the face the whole time. And they waved the fight off, rightly so, because it was just dreadful to watch and really sad. I mean, BJ Penn's chin, still ridiculous. The fact that he was in there as an old man, out of practice, getting hit with every kick that was thrown, and still there. Just ludicrous. But really, this, I feel, for me, as a pundity person, or whatever you want to call me, as a person from the internet whose opinion some people listen to, this felt like the third Frankie Edgar fight, in that I felt it was a waste of the other guy's time. It was a fight that didn't move him forward in any way, and it was a fight that Penn could have taken a more fitting fight. If BJ Penn fought someone who wasn't even like top 30 featherweight in the UFC, well, maybe that's a bit harsh, but like if you match BJ Penn against like the number 25 featherweight, if Penn wins, that's still great. He's come back from a retirement and he's proved he's still got something left in him. If that guy wins, you can go, oh wow, BJ Penn is old and not won since 2010, but to go from unknown to beating that old legend, that's okay. When you got like a young hot prospect beating the shit out of him, or a top flight guy like Frankie Edgar, it just feels like a waste of their time, like a diversion away from the march towards the title. But it is what it is, and it wasn't very good. Or it was, depending if you like seeing murders. Alexey Oleinik, or Alexey Oleinik, if you go to his Wikipedia page, got the better of Victor Pesta. Oleinik is a boy because of those, well, is it 10 now? 10 Ezekiel submissions on his record, and a chest compressor against Crocop. That's just mental. But his striking is woeful. He looked really herky-jerky. He's got 60 fights, and his striking's not going to get better now. But he was struggling to get his man down, and then he tries for a standing Ezekiel choke. I was like, you absolute madman. Ends up on his back, getting mounted, and then gives up his back, gets punched in the face a few times, rolls back, gets mounted again, slaps on the Ezekiel from the bottom of mount, and finishes it from there. Just astonishing. And that's the Ezekiel in a nutshell. It's one of those things where if you build an amazing one, you can do it from a lot of places, but equally, if you spend time building an amazing one, your coach will lose his mind, because you're going to be attempting it from the underside of mount and inside guard and things like that, when you probably should be learning how to pass or escape. But to do that with no gi and punches allowed is even more impressive, which is why he's such a boy. And you'll see guys demonstrate like a no-gi hand choke, like Barrett Yoshida put it in a book, great book, you should get his little book, Barrett Yoshida. And a few other guys I've seen demonstrate like a hand choke or a Ezekiel choke. And a lot of the time it's just like a, please open your elbows so that I can start working up under them from mount. To actually be able to finish it is very, very rare, without the gi especially. It's a very peculiar type of squeeze, and clearly he has it, and he has practiced it for years. So not a great fight like the talent on show by either guy, and certainly getting choked from the top of mount is very embarrassing, no matter who you are. It means you're not controlling the other guy's hands at all. But a very cool and peculiar finish, so, I enjoyed it. It was a nice diversion. Then you have Marcin Held versus Joe Lauzon, and even Lauzon was classy about that. He said that he felt Held won. Well, he's always been good at that. He's one of those guys who's humble in victory and defeat, which is a lot more believable when you don't shout it like Conor McGregor. I am humble in victory and defeat. No, he doesn't have to say anything about it. He just says, yeah, I think that guy won, or, it was a good fight. I thought it was a good display of both men's skills. It was one of those fights that was a little bit slower paced, did get into a lock of wills. So there was a lot of fighting in areas that aren't very attractive to the audience. But a couple of cool things. Lauzon obviously almost brained Held with those elbows when he was hanging on the single early on. And Held recovered, and from that point on in that round, he was only going for clinch takedowns. And that's a really good adjustment to make, because a lot of guys, it seems strange from the outside, but guys will go back to the things they know, even if it just almost got them knocked out, because that's muscle memory. But he tried for the inside trip on the fence, and Lauzon lifted his leg all the way up, and it didn't look like it was going to have any effect. And Held put his toes in the fence and then pushed off as he tried to take him down, as he, I think it was a knee tap in the other direction. So another useful little display of fence work, which I thought was pretty cool. Anyone who uses the fence as a surface to push off, love it. In fact, I got a question last week that I forgot to answer about what I believe, whether I believe it would be interesting to have a massive matted area. Effectively like an infinite plane for people to fight on. And I actually don't. I used to be a very pro-ring person. I got into MMA through Pride and Shooto and things like that. So I was pro-ring. And, I was always like, oh, the cage slows it down, all that leading on the cage. But once you start to appreciate the art, you're reluctant to let people take it away. It's just, taking away different ways that guys can fight. If you do have two guys fight on an infinite plane, basically, you've got them dancing around each other, and whoever leads first is at a disadvantage all the time because he's showing his hand. If you have stuff that guys can run onto, suddenly leading is a more viable option because you can pressure people, take away their space, take away that time and measure by putting them close to the fence. But at any rate, then Held in the second and third, he was timing takedowns a lot better. Joe Lauzon, if you haven't seen his guard work, to be honest, he's a really technical guy, and I think that's why he's aged so well compared to a lot of the guys who even beat him back in the day. He's still hanging around, and he's still fairly healthy, and I think a lot of that is because he's such a student of the game. If you watched him against, even in that blowout against Diego Sanchez, he's swinging on him on the fence, and Sanchez is covering up. And Lauzon's still picking his shots. He's still moving slightly off to the left and the right, lining up the shots better. He's not just teeing off on the guy's guard, hoping that the referee will stop it for his activity and his opponent's inactivity. He's actually landing the blows and setting them up and stuff. On the ground, I thought he was doing a great job. He kept making sure that he was getting his butterfly hooks in and starting to work his way up. He wasn't hanging around in guard. Which, he could do because he's a guy who does a lot of submissions, but it was really interesting seeing him. He did it two different ways. He did knee shield into butterfly guard, and he also did double grapevines, where you stretch the other guy's legs out in guard, and it's just really annoying for them, and then he flicked his leg inside and started working for butterfly guard. And he plays a lot of overhook butterfly guard, which is a very interesting and powerful position if you're good at it, but very nuanced position, so it can also backfire if you're not good at it. In fact, we were talking about that last week with BJ Penn. He did a load of that against Frankie Edgar in their second fight, actually. Swept him almost, I think he looked for a triangle at one point. In fact, Eddie Bravo versus Royler Gracie, their first match, it's not really the rubber guard or anything like that wins it for Bravo. He gets to overhook butterfly guard, fakes a sweep, and throws up a triangle and catches him. Overhooks, very interesting generally, because you don't have as much control to lift the guy or slip out the back door, but you have locked him to you, and in a game where you can punch, that's a lot more interesting, or can be a lot safer. Anywho, I felt Held probably should have got the decision. Lauzon thought that too. Held probably thought that too. Now the deal with these Fight Night cards is that I just watch the ones that are interesting to me. Unless it's an interesting finish, and then I'll watch it. Actually, the Walt Harris one was really good. Just rallied on him, hit him with a knee, and then came straight out of the double collar tie, straight into punches. Decked him. Sergio Pettis versus John Moraga was a fairly interesting match, mainly because Moraga was beating Pettis to the punch, but wasn't doing anything to be elusive afterwards. This was something Customato obviously went on about all the time. He was like, if the fighter's always trying to be elusive, there won't be any problems. But Moraga was throwing his punch, and then that was the end of the action in his mind. He was like, yes, scored the punch. And he'd snap Sergio Pettis' head back, and Pettis would throw a punch back, and then another one. And he'd catch Moraga every time. And that's just experience. Get a hit in the face, punch back, or rather, if you do land a blow, or miss a blow, in fact, move your head, or do something to get out of the way. And then I watched the Invicta interim title fight. Interim? Yeah, it was interim, which is just so ridiculous. But it just seems like they are holding out in case this... well, maybe they're hoping that the whole drug issue means that Cyborg's no longer welcome in the UFC because they do fights in proper commissions and do all their own testing and stuff. Maybe they want Cyborg to have to go back to Kansas City, Missouri. Well, I don't know what the commission's like there, but I'm going to guess it's not as stringent as some of the ones that the UFC is more frequent in using. But anyway, this was a fight for an interim featherweight belt. Megan, not Megan, Megan, like Broken Matt Hardy would say it. Megan Anderson versus Charmaine Tweet. And, I mean, the standard is... I mean, this is... Not only is the standard of women's MMA still catching up with the men's, but this is this is the B list of women's MMA. So I didn't go in with especially high hopes. I mean, if you noticed all the clips in the build-up, when you put your highlight reel of all the fighters on the show together, and you have all their finishes, it was very clear that all the finishes were coming against exhausted opponents. Not an awful lot of great finishes in many of the women's divisions, which is why people loved Ronda Rousey and why people love Cyborg. People don't want to watch decisions and in any division. At any rate, this fight was fairly decent. I mean, I'd not seen Megan Anderson before, and I was pretty impressed. Charmaine Tweet, I've only seen 2 of her fights, and both of them she looked really awkward and kept spinning for back fists for no reason. The old Dong Hyun Kim method. And a couple of them clattered off Megan Anderson's skull because that's the nature of the spinning back fist. If you do it enough, you'll catch the guy with his hands out of position. Bit of running in wild from Anderson, got caught with the right hand and wobbled in the first round. Kept the pressure up, picked her shots better, and Tweet was always on the fence, so she couldn't really generate power or do anything. Julie Kedzie kept talking about the weird angles that Charmaine Tweet works, but really it just looked like herky-jerky movement. Yeah, I mean, not a great fight, but the finish was pretty good. Just rallied half a dozen punches and then a kick right through the middle of the guard, straight into the face. Really tasty, actually. And Anderson won, and now she's the interim featherweight champion. So, we've got another name at featherweight, at least. And she did do a call-out for the UFC. She was like, tell whoever wins between Holly Holm and Jermaine Duradimi to keep my belt warm, because I'm fucking coming. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I think she's probably going to be very marketable. I mean, she's a decent scrapper. She's a fairly good finisher. She's big enough to actually be a featherweight, and she's good looking. She'll do well. Also, she's Australian, and if you go back to Australia with Holly Holm and her, I'm sure you could sell a lot of tickets after Holm's last performance with Rousey there. Was that in Australia? That was in Australia, wasn't it? I got to thinking while I was watching this, real absence of bodywork from Anderson. I think she could really benefit from it, especially straights to the body, because she spent the whole fight backing Tweet onto the fence and then looking for headshots. And I was thinking, if you could dig in some good body shots, because, I mean, as I already pointed out, a lot of the finishes in women's MMA, especially because they're not particularly big punches, most of the women in most of the divisions, come from fatigue and just an accumulation of damage, and you can really speed that along with bodywork. The other thing is, if you were training a female fighter, frankly, if you were training any fighter, you have to work to their attributes. And I think if you have someone who's not a huge puncher, I think you've got to really recognize that kicking and kneeing and elbowing, are going to be far more damaging methods for them. and that if they can create more opportunities to do that, they might as well, rather than trying to box if they can't box with any authority. Or as much authority. You know, almost anyone would prefer to land an elbow to a punch most of the time, but just because of the power and the lack of glove and the pointy bone. But if I had one thing to work on with Megan Anderson, I think it would probably be body kicks, front snap kicks, push kicks, round kicks, just constant work of the body. Especially if she's got a reputation for kicking people in the head now, so it gets a little bit easier to kick people in the body when their elbows start floating up. So those were the fights this weekend. Let's do some questions. What are some of the techniques not usually seen in MMA, or professional fighting in general, that you would absolutely mark out if someone busted out? Kotegayashi? Suplexes in general? Baji Kwan elbows and bumps? Wing Chun hand trapping sequences? Thanks as always for the interesting weekly cast. It really makes the morning commute easier. And that's from Corey. I'm a huge fan of low singles. I used to love Sakuraba doing those. And some of the setups he had where he'd just punt the legs until they picked up one leg to check. And then he'd shoot low on the other one and catch the ankle. That was beautiful. He also did a great one on not Oleg Tektarov. Sorry, Igor Vovchanchin. He did a great one on Igor Vovchanchin where he was backing into a corner. And then he shot, I think it was on Vovchanchin's back leg, but he basically skidded all the way around the mat on his knees, all the way around Igor, and came out behind him. So that was really cool. Any sort of low single I'm going to mark out, if you can actually hit it. I'd really like to see some rolling back takes in MMA, but obviously people are a lot more reluctant to attempt any sort of rolling technique, because if you fuck it up, you're on the bottom. Gary Tonnen does a thing where if he mounts a guy, he'll let them catch his ankle in quarter guard, and then he'll sort of dismount and start a rolling back take from there. And that's a really cool little technique. I would love to see some guys try that. I'd love to see anyone try the weird passing that Penn did with like the pigeon stretch position. I'm always going to be advocating more body shots, but we see them a lot more nowadays, so I don't really have to say that. I'll tell you what I would love to see. Elbows to the body. You see them on the ground and they do make a huge difference to fights, but I'd love to see them in the clinch. If you've got a guy with a double collar tie on you, you can probably get off a couple of decent elbows to the floating rib. If their arms are forward, if their elbows are between you and them, you should have a target there. Won't be a huge power thing because you won't be able to move your body as well, and you don't have the swinging ability that you do with your hands when you're stuck in a double collar tie or pressing into someone as they attempt a double collar tie. And if I had someone from day one, someone like, I don't know, some 13-year-old gets brought to your gym and they insist they're going to be a UFC champion or something like that, I think I'd probably want to work on maybe some toe kicks with just one foot, because they're absolutely brutal. If you feel a decent toe kick, because it takes a lifetime to and it basically takes deforming your foot to do a really good toe kick, but if you ever feel one, they're stern. I mean, the whole reason that the kicks with the ball of the foot are so much more effective to the body is because you've got that very small area that the pressure's going through. Do it with a toe, and that's really going to hurt. Actually, I was talking the other day about battling Nelson, but his favourite left hook, the half scissor left hook, was basically like driving his thumb into the guy's ribs. Because they had very thin gloves back then. Really interesting. Look it up. But he credited that as the punch that made him a great fighter rather than just a good fighter. And I think he finished Joe Gans with it. But he certainly hurt a lot of guys with it. And it surprised him that he had this power over this distance. But it's not so much power if you're digging in through a small surface. Heel kicks to the kidneys are about to come back again. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think that could stink up the guard game. If guys just go, well, no, actually, I might just sit here and heal him in the kidneys, as opposed to work, like the old days of Shuto and shit like that. I think Shuto were like the last to get rid of that rule, weren't they? Because I remember watching whole fights that were just heel kicks to the kidneys from the guard, and it sucked. Another one I'd really like to see is someone in a field where elbows are legal, someone used that Floyd Mayweather projected lead elbow into the face. You've probably seen this. Basically, Floyd did the Stonewall style defense with the low lead hand, but his hand tucked into his body and his shoulder up to his chin. If guys were really coming in behind their face a lot, like Ricky Hatton or Shane Mosley did it a lot, trying to rough him up, he'd just lift his elbow up and point it right to where he knew they were going to drive in face first. And it was one of those, he's running onto my elbow. I'm not moving my elbow towards him. He's just running into the space it's occupying. But I think that'd be really interesting to see in MMA. Nick Diaz showed some signs of it. I think it was against Anderson Silva. But it didn't really have any effect because Anderson Silva was on his bicycle that night. He didn't really want anything to do with Nick Diaz. But that'd be interesting. Also, a nice little one from Kyokushin is what's called, I can't remember the Japanese name, but it's a gouging knee. And basically, you pick your leg up to check, like a round kick, to the leg or the body. And you pump your knee in with your hip. You push your hips in like you would for a teep, and you try and gouge the knee into the thigh of the opponent. I mean, it's really, half the time you do it, it's not going to work. Like, you're just going to miss their leg coming back altogether. But it'd be interesting to see some guys trying to do that. It works better in like a Kyokushin sort of context where you're standing almost chest to chest trading low kicks. Next question. Hi Jack, could you briefly discuss the main uses and purposes of padwork? Watching boxers hit the mitts, it seems that they are not much concerned with throwing full extension into their punches, so it must not be to develop power. Is it a training tool to develop timing and comfort with certain combinations? Why is Ronda Rousey's mittwork widely regarded as poor? Thanks. And that's from Chad. Ronda's mittwork wasn't really regarded as poor, until everyone realized that she wasn't actually learning to box from it. Mittwork is it's a coach by coach thing. It's going to change from coach to coach. I've seen guys who really like their guys to power into the mitts and make sure they're actually extending their punches all the way. And I've seen guys who'll meet their opponent, their charges hands halfway, like the Mayweathers do. For some people, it's drilling reactions and just going through the motions day by day. For other people, it is like what, in Muay Thai, your pad work is basically sparring. You're working with the pad man, but you're also working against the pad man. He's going to throw stuff back at you. And I think that's why Thais get so good at, throwing their kick and immediately being ready to catch the opponent's kick or counter. And it's a really good way to do that because then you're not sparring and taking abuse to the head every day. Well, I mean, most people don't spar every day, even at the craziest camps. But when you are doing pad work every day, you are working against another human being. It's like if you grapple every day, you are working against another human being. You're not just working with a bag or something that's not giving you the feedback. So a coach can watch you shadow box or something like that and tell you stuff. But again, if there's not something there slapping you in the head going, you forgot that, it's quite easy to overlook it. And that's, a huge part of what the mittwork is. You are in front of a human-shaped target that's going to move around and make you move all over the ring, make you cut the ring, make you run from them, depending on what the coach wants you to do. But again, there is an awful lot of debate on this in the martial arts and boxing communities. There are guys who swear by the Mayweather-style mittwork, and there are guys who swear by having guys do full extension punches and things like that. And the whole extension issue, you'll hear this in shadowboxing too. There are guys who mime their punch. Shadowboxing is like a miming thing for them, and there are guys like B-Hop who really goes full extension on his punches. Maybe he's not going full speed all the time, but he's going through the entire motion, the whole step. The whole extend the punch out and come back. And then you watch guys like Manny Pacquiao, who a lot of it are just, they're going and throwing out hundreds of punches per round, but they're not full punches. They're just miming stuff. Who's to say what's right? I mean, both those guys have won enough world titles. But it's interesting that guys like Freddie Roach and Roger Mayweather have very different approaches on the pads, but both of them swear by the pads. Freddie Roach says it's the best piece of training kit that ever came along, and obviously the Mayweathers swear by it. But then, everyone's got a different approach, and that's half the fun of going to a different gym if you want to do some Muay Thai or something like that, there are bits that are like the same from Padman to Padman, and then there are bits that are different, and you'll have this sort of like, it's almost like a first dance with whoever you're training with, where you go, oh, was that what you meant there? You know, if you're getting rounds in doing different things, as opposed to just doing one style of mitt work or the heavy bag or, you know, whatever, then you're doing well. And I mean, that's the point of the mitts. They were introduced to give variety and some feedback. Hey Jack, loving the pod. Ooh, was taunting a big part of Cody Garbrandt's strategy going into the Cruz fight, or just a coincidental expression of Cody's personality? People, especially people at Alpha Male, have been trying to figure out how to catch Cruz for years. Garbrandt didn't bother and instead got Cruz to come to him. Garbrandt took the center of the ring and taunted Cruz each time he missed or landed. Was it just the taunting getting under Cruz's skin that got him to lead and be aggressive, or was there more to what Garbrandt showed him? Did Garbrandt discover an effective way to deal with Cruz, or will a fighter like TJ or even Cruz in a rematch ignore the taunts and force Garbrandt to come forward and lead? That's Daniel from brackets WA and then Shington State, because I didn't know which state WA was in the first episode of this podcast, I think it was. I think... Well, this is that infinite plane thing again. If you want to fight on the counter, if you can draw the other guy into leading, you've got an advantage. And if both guys feel like they've got an advantage on the counter, it's really hard to get the other guy to lead. I think Dominic Cruz has been used to drawing guys out, countering, circling off, doing this, that, and the other, and then they get discouraged, and he starts stepping in more. You've seen that in a few of his fights, especially the Faber ones. Faber got, would get disheartened and start standing still and waiting for Cruz to come to him, and Cruz would just poke him and leave. And I think Garbrandt holding back so early probably helped in getting Cruz to come forward. I think had Garbrandt given him a round or two, I think it would have been hard to get Cruz to come forward again. Because, you looking at this like... I always look at it like the Anderson Silva thing. If you can score a few points in the first round, or the second round, or whatever, you're up on the cards. Especially if you're the champion. You can say, yep, I'm not coming to you. You better come to me. You've got to come take the title. So it's very impressive that Garbrandt got Cruz to lead, especially when Cruz is such a smart guy and knows that, very close decision as the champion, you're probably going to get it. A very boring fight probably also favours the champion. But I think Cruz might have even been a victim to his own trash talk, because, Garbrandt seemed extremely pissed off throughout the entire build-up to this fight. And I think, either he really was, or that walkout was a stroke of genius, because we all thought he was going to go in there absolutely livid and just be made to look a fool. And the fact that he didn't, and that he hung back, almost seemed to make Dominic Cruz angry. And certainly the taunting and stuff after that, if you've done so poorly through the pre-fight talk and then suddenly you're in there and you're saying, well, I'm winning where it counts, definitely going to be disheartening. It's hard to gauge what value to put on talk, because some guys have just got it, they don't care, they're not going to be bothered at all regardless, and some guys, in particular, like the specific matchup between two guys, it just might make no difference. A perfect example of the effect of trash talk and all that stuff is Aldo versus McGregor, because Jose Aldo was absolutely cool, through all their meetings, and in those documentary, the little things they put out on Fight Pass covering the world tour, you can see him being bored, disinterested, and then finally towards the end he's getting annoyed, with every stare down they go on, and Aldo's absolutely correct. He's like, every town we go to, he threatens to swing at me, and he never does. He always gets held back by Dana White. He knows it's going to happen. I'm not bothered at all. I just want to get home to my family. I'm bored. And, and then finally by the last one, he seems genuinely pissed off. And then he came into the fight, and, the guy who, the mark on his career, the reason that people didn't see him as a fan-friendly champion was that he spent his whole career being conservative and slowly building a lead. And he goes out there and he runs at Conor McGregor with his chin out. So, as much as I like the cold and the technical and the strategic, tempers flaring happens, and what people say outside can matter. It just takes a certain amount of time to do. I don't know if Conor McGregor could have got under Aldo's skin so well if they hadn't done the biggest press tour of all time in the UFC before that fight. But people are affected by what's said, and it might not be upset, might not even be pissed off. It might simply be the desire to get something done and then go, ha, and rub it in the other guy's face. Certainly, I think there's a certain style of trash talk that doesn't really work. I think, firstly, repetition over a great number of, over a good period, that'll work. And the sort of stuff that Dominic Cruz does, the sort of smug, annoying stuff, that'll work. But, questioning people's masculinity and being like, oh, he doesn't want to bang with me or whatever. Melvin Manhoef used to do this in his MMA fights. He'd be like, oh, I hope he's not too much of a pussy to stand with me. And then Gegard Mousasi would come out, take him down and finish him easily. And then Manhoef afterwards would be like, oh, he was too much of a pussy to stand with me. You're like, well, no shit. You've got no takedown defense. Of course he's going to take you down. He's not just going to stand and bang with you because you asked him to, or because you said, oh, if he doesn't, he's a big sissy. Yeah, guys develop thick skins, but equally, most people in the fight game are fairly emotional, so you can get under their skin one way or another. You just have to find it. Right, I reckon that'll do us for questions this week. Remember to send your questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com, and I'll answer them next episode. Right, before I leave you today, I thought we'd do a fight of the week, because it's been a while since we did one of those, and it's going to be another one that's freely available on YouTube. And it's actually probably the fight where most people thought that BJ Penn was the man. The fight that made BJ Penn the number one lightweight in the world, in most people's opinion. Or it certainly kept him there a long time later on. We're talking about BJ Penn versus Takanori Gomi, which was at Rumble on the Rock 4, and it was October 10th, 2003. Now, in terms of where these guys are at the time, BJ Penn's at 5-1 with one draw, and the draw is the last fight, which was against Kaoluno at UFC 41, which was for the UFC lightweight title. And you'll remember that they put the title basically on the back burner after that because they didn't want to do another rematch and then decide the title. They just thought, fuck it. But this is just before BJ Penn goes globetrotting after leaving the UFC the first time. And it is in his native Hawaii. It's in Honolulu. And it was an FEG-owned promotion. Rumble on the Rock actually had some pretty good fights back in the day. A quick read down the welterweight tournament bracket. You got Jake Shields, Yushin Okami, Anderson Silva, both those guys at welterweight, crazy to think about nowadays. Ronald Yun, Frank Trigg, Renato Verissimo, Carlos Condit, and then Dave Monet of all people. Bit weird. Those names back then, now what they've become, pretty cool that they managed to get talent like that, or burgeoning young talent, in. So BJ Penn versus Takanori Gomi was a huge fight for Rumble on the Rock. It was the main event. And Takanori Gomi had a significant experience edge on Penn. He was 14-1, and he just suffered his first loss, and it was a bit of a shocker to Joachim Hansen. Suffered the majority decision loss at Shuto and lost his lightweight championship. It's listed as a lightweight championship, but for some reason I thought he'd won the welterweight championship because the weight classes are a bit weird in Shuto. But this is just brilliant BJ Penn. At his absolute best, probably. This is before Gomi became the fearsome boxer puncher that he became later on. Isn't really throwing kicks or knees or anything like that. None of the stuff he was famous for in Pride, but he was already famous as a ground and pounder. And as a wrestler. So it came as something of a surprise when Penn came storming out of the gate, threw a left hook, immediately dropped in on the shot and drove right through on Gomi, who's a bit bigger than him if you look at the two of them. Penn immediately gets into that weird pigeon stretch position where he's trapped one of Gomi's legs in essentially the back of his knee as he's sitting on it in a yoga stretch. And then he pushes into butterfly half guard, all that stuff from the BJJ Scout video, one of my absolute favourites. Clears the knee, moves straight to mount. Gomi gives up his back, and then BJ gets a little bit of help from the Hawaiian crowd as he pounds the back of Gomi's head relentlessly, which was illegal at the time. but goes unnoticed. And he even tries to elbow Gomi in the back of the head at one point and misses. But yeah, absolutely brutal through the first round. When Gomi does get up, he gets boxed up for the first part of the fight, and then he starts to realise that his jab is a good deal longer and harder than Penn's. This is before Penn became like the counter jab machine that you saw from the Shirk fight onwards. He's still pretty much obsessed with his left hook here, and he's throwing knees and kicks. So this is back when BJ Penn knew those existed. Yeah, they both get pretty beat up on the feet, and Penn takes him down in the third round, and Gomi grabs a hold of a guillotine as Penn's stepping over one of his legs. Gomi tries to muscle him over in a butterfly sweep of some kind, and Penn lands smash into that leg weave position, sitting on both of his legs. Gomi gives up his back again, gets beat up some more, gets choked out. BJ Penn stands up, goes mental, and the promoter comes in and tries to hug him from behind, and BJ turns around with his right hand up, ready to knock the dude out, thinking it's like Gomi or Gomi's corner. Really cool. But just the best of early BJ Penn. In fact, early BJ Penn's fights were really good, because there was always that issue with his gas tank and getting disheartened if he couldn't finish guys, but he was light years ahead of what was going on at the time. In fact, his fight with Matt Serra, most people probably haven't watched it because it's a unanimous decision way back in the day, so there's not a lot of reason looking down someone's record to look at it. But both of them hit some really interesting stand-ups from guard. Like, they can't keep each other down. It's brilliant. And his fights with Caoluno, obviously great, because Caoluno at the time was like so squirrely and unsubmittable. So this is like our third or fourth career eulogy for BJ Penn. To be honest, I don't make predictions, but I would happily make a prediction that he'll headline another event before 2020, because the UFC just won't say no to him. And he is, I mean, at this point, he's probably delusional. If he thinks he can keep jumping in with young guys at the height of their powers, on the way up, it's a bit daft. I mean, I'd have no objections to him trying to take a tune-up against some really low-level guy in the UFC's division, or even, give him the Sage Northcutt treatment. Bring in someone specifically to lose to him, if you really want the legend to stick around and sell some tickets for you. Maybe if they go Hawaii at some point with Max Holloway on the main event, they could do a BJ Penn on the main card. Hey, you could drag out Caoluno. Is he still fighting? I know he's lost a lot of fights now. Actually, Caoluno, in terms of... Jesus Christ, I'm looking at Caoluno's record. It's just a mass of red. But the Mitsuhiro Ishida fight from the Dream tournament was absolutely brilliant. That was when Uno had been out for like a year, and nobody really gave him a chance in this tournament of hot young lightweights, and he just came out and battered Ishida. And then in the next round, Shinya Aoki just crawled all over him trying to submit him, and Caoluno, pretty hard to submit, as we've already pointed out. He got through however long with BJ Penn and got a draw. So that fight definitely worth checking out, because when Gomi went to Japan and started to polish his boxing and his knees especially, he was considered the number one in the world at lightweight, and Penn wasn't always fighting at lightweight during this time. He was doing his sort of weight hopping silliness. Yeah, Gomi was ranked number one until like 2007, before he started slipping, and then the UFC picked him up so that no other Japanese promotion could have him, even though he was still losing fights. But when Gomi was number one in the world, a lot of people considered this fight, the Gomi versus Penn one, as a reason to keep Penn as number one in the world, even though he wasn't actually fighting in the lightweight division. And, Gomi was racking up, at one point he almost cleared out the top 10. It was, no one ever really does that, but it was close stuff, especially with tournaments. It gets a lot easier because you're fighting all the best guys on one night. It would have been really interesting to see the rematch, actually, once Gomi had learned to box a bit and was going to the body more, because BJ Penn hates bodywork, as we've pointed out. I mean, I used to point this out back in the day when he was still champion, and people would be like, "Oh, Jack, you're a moron." But, it is what it is. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this week. If you are a Patreon boy, remember to go and watch the history episode. If you're not a Patreon boy, go and watch the tight footwork and saggy buns of Gentleman Jim. It's a great little study on what was essentially the old school Dominic Cruz. Emails to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm Jack Slack, and I'll catch you next week. Cheers.